So Elena, you're going to get us started on the work session. This is the presentation discussion. It's a very hot mic. And possible action regarding educational series related to comprehensive planning and community visioning. And then also a policy discussion regarding application deadline, board meetings, and neighborhood meetings.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so this first one is the first reinstallment or first installment of the educational series that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended, just going over different planning topics and principles. And this is according to the schedule that we talked about late last year. But wanted to revamp it and reboot and kind of start at the beginning. So today we're going to talk about the concept of comprehensive planning and community visioning. And we'll go through some of those core principles, keep it at a high level and give some examples of some of what you see in the city's comprehensive plan, and then open it up for any questions from the commission. So an old professor of mine always opened up their presentations with a quote. So I thought it would be fitting. This one is from Jane Jacobs. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. So Jane Jacobs, she was an urbanist and activist in the 1960s, and she really championed that community-based approach before it was popular in current urban planning principles. And so I thought that was a nice quote to start off the discussion. So why do we plan? Planning for land use and future growth and development is a really important activity for local governments, not just at the municipal level, but also at the county level, and that goes for state to state and nationwide. So all local communities plan for future growth and development, whether you call it a comprehensive plan or a land use plan or a growth management plan. And the reason why we plan is essentially to make sure that the desired vision of the community is what the city seeks to achieve. And so planning is a benefit to the community for all those things that I just mentioned, but also for very specific things that are really similar and consistent with most community-wide planning efforts. One of the fundamental responsibilities, again, for local government is planning for the future. And planning is the word we describe, again, for how community shapes and guides the growth and development of the community. Some people call this city planning. Some people call it urban planning. Again, some people call these documents comprehensive plans or growth management plans, but they're all essentially comprehensive plans for a local community. And these, again, include the different elements that you see on your screen. And so when we look at effective planning, we want to ensure that future development occurs where, when, and how the community and local government wants, and that several important beliefs of the community are a result of that planning process. And so that includes quality of life, that is maintained and improved through the process, that there's a vision that's clearly stated and shared by all, and that vision describes the future of the community, that private property rights are protected through that process, that economic development is encouraged and supported, and that there's essentially more certainty about where development will occur, what it will be like, when it will happen, and how the cost of development will be met. And then when we look at the trifecta of social, economic, and environmental benefits, they call that the triple bottom line, and essentially all these come together to create an overall improved quality of life for the community. These are some common values that really are common to several communities, but especially for Nacogdoches. They include affordable housing, housing appreciation, inexpensive or attainable housing, clean air and water, well-paying jobs and good schools has always been a top priority for the community, good weather, uniqueness, our character and historic charm that's really unique to Nacogdoches, promoting an engaged community, outdoor recreation, low crime rate, low taxes, plentiful services such as doctors and medical facilities, and then, of course, retail. So those are just some common things that you kind of see as far as those themes that are outlined in different comprehensive plans. And so comprehensive planning really is an art and a science. It's essentially considered a science because of the reliance on technical data and scientific information, such as environmental sciences, demography, geography. And so this technical data helps inform the process when we're looking at transportation systems, utility systems, and even human behavior. So this helps us forecast expected future conditions based on past trends and conditions. Then on the other hand, it's considered an art because we focus on the design of cities, of neighborhoods, of buildings, and then citizens gather to think about how they envision those possible futures and apply creativity to the design of their community. And of course, this always includes striking balance between the needs of everyone in the community who live, work, and play in that local jurisdiction. And so there's 3 questions that are good to use whenever we're looking at the process as far as how we want to embark, and that includes, what do we have? So knowing where we're at before we know where we're going to go. And that second one is, what do we want, or where are we going? And then 3 is, how will we get it? Excuse me. So what do we have, what do we want, and how do we get it? And so there's no universal method of developing a plan, but these are just kind of those 3 primary questions that communities typically ask themselves. So when looking at what you have, it's essential to have an accurate and current information about the community in which you're planning. And so it's really hard to it's really hard to plan on maintaining or changing a current situation if you don't really know some of that background information as far as what the current economic environment is in the community, or what your current housing market looks like, or what kind of state your infrastructure is in. And so really knowing kind of it's almost like a health checkup, of knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are, so that way you can look at areas for improvement and figure out what steps you need to take to achieve that desired result. So these are often called background checks, data analysis, and whenever you're looking at a comprehensive plan, that first section really is that kind of background information about economics, demographics, utilities, land use trends, to really inform that process when you're looking at what you can do in the future. The second, what do you want? So it's been said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And this is never truer than in the preparation of a plan. So the contents of the plan must reflect the vision of the community, along with strategies to achieve the vision, and then policies to direct the daily decision-making leading to that vision. And so who decides what you want? Well, everyone does. What the community wants really should be an expression of the future that the community wants as a whole. And so that always includes a striking or a balance of different conflicting goals, aspirations, desired futures. And so when you're looking at that expression, how can you develop that through visioning processes and design charrettes and brainstorming and community forums and workshops and focus groups and all of those kind of public engagement tools that you use to gather that input to make sure it is as reflective of the different dynamics and populations of the community as much as you can. The point is to provide ample opportunity for the citizens of the community to express those wishes and hopes and desires. And so whenever you're looking at it, it's essentially not trying to create necessarily consensus, but trying to find those common themes everyone can agree on, so that way you do have something that you can work towards. And again, one of those primary goals of the planning and project team is to balance those competing interests, weigh the various proposals, evaluate what's actually possible. So whenever you're looking at what's desirable, you can identify, all right, this is what the community wants, this is what we can actually achieve, and this is what we can do in the short term, midterm, and long term. So balancing all those things together. And then how will you get it? So there's technical, political, legal, and managerial issues that vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction whenever you're looking at implementation of plans. So it's important to remember that for the planning process, a single project isn't going to implement the plan. Usually there's multiple projects that speak to different sections of the plan. Oftentimes this can be achieved through long-term capital improvement projects. And so you'll see implementation of the Parks and Recreation Plan through acquisition of parkland or construction of new parks in neighborhoods. You'll see it through upsizing of water infrastructure to accommodate for more density or more commercial in a certain area. You'll see it through a grants and special programs department through the city, where they're actually promoting grants for beautification to streetscape, and they're promoting grants for housing rehabilitation. So it's a very dynamic process, and usually it's multifaceted across departments, and so you need a multifaceted implementation strategy. And whenever you're doing that, you also want to reference your previous plans so you can look at what results you achieved through that one, what was implemented, what wasn't, and why, and use that as a framework when you're embarking on the new process. Right, it's also important to plan to plan. So the key factors associated with this include the allocation of time, human resources, money, energy, and effort. Does the city actually have the resources to embark on this long-range planning process? And this step is often overlooked or shortchanged. So there are several questions that you can consider before initiating the process, and the answers to these questions typically will guide the process and result in an effective plan for the community versus not planning to plan. And so there's a couple of different questions, and we've got them on your screen, and we'll go through them briefly. And these include who will prepare the plan. And so there's lots of different choices. A lot of larger cities have full-time comprehensive planning staff. That's all they do Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, is they're in charge of implementing and updating their long-range plans. And these usually include a larger planning staff that has current range planning, where you're looking at building permits and site plans, and then separate staff for kind of your long-range initiatives. So this could include professional staff from your jurisdiction, professional staff from a regional development center. So if you have a COG or kind of a regional planning association, oftentimes they'll engage in long-range planning efforts on behalf of smaller communities. These could include volunteers from the community or consultants hired to assist in preparing the plan, or a combination of these things. Usually you do see a combination where you'll bring in a consultant to provide an expertise that maybe you don't have on staff, or to supplement staff instead of hiring full-time, and so you have that combination. How long will the planning process take? And so this often depends on the number of people that are available for the plan. It also depends on the complexity of the situations, and then how much involvement that you're going to have your citizens participate in as far as what your public engagement process. And so the process could be several months, it could be multiple years, and so depending on the nature of the plan, whether it's so just to provide an example, the downtown master plan that the city's about to embark in, that process in and of itself could take anywhere from 6 to 9 months, because it's a small area plan, it's more focused, more specific, and then the comprehensive plan, which is the citywide plan, that's going to be a much larger effort. And so the public engagement piece of that and all the different components of it has a broader breadth and range than the downtown plan. So typically those are anywhere from 12 to 18 months. But since we're combining them, the overall process will still be 12 to 18 months, and you'll see that downtown plan being completed just a few months prior to the comprehensive plan. So it depends on the breadth and scope of the plan, the topic of the plan, and again, how much public involvement you're planning on having in the process. Number 3, what subject matter will be included? So the core topics that are often included in plans for community-wide comprehensive plans include land use, transportation, utilities, infrastructure. But again, you could have a specific neighborhood plan where you're planning just for a specific subdivision or a area of the city. You'll see corridor plans. Part of our comprehensive plan is the I-69 corridor plan that'll target that specific area and go in more detail as to what the city should look at as far as recommendations for development standards and making sure that we have infrastructure to accommodate that growth. And so different examples of long-range planning efforts that cities usually participate in. Yes.
Can we interact a little bit with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, please. Stop and ask questions along the way.
On the comprehensive plan, so I read the one we have currently in place, front to back a couple times. Didn't take long to read. There's not a lot to it. And it maybe served its purpose, but it's just not a lot to it. This comprehensive plan, when you talk about infrastructure that's incorporated, it'll be encompassed into this plan, infrastructure. What is an example of infrastructure? Because I don't know, I talked to Steve Bartlett. I mean, he needs to know exactly what size water line, where it needs to go, so he can support neighborhood development, et cetera. Does it get that granular, or does it, what does it mean?
So infrastructure essentially includes some sort of public utility. Usually it's water lines, sewer lines, streets. Public infrastructure can also include our drainage system. Our infrastructure can also include our city facilities. Our parks is considered infrastructure. So all those city-maintained public services. Whenever you're looking at the infrastructure associated with the comprehensive plan, they're going to be looking at those large kind of citywide utilities. And so if you look in the comprehensive plan, there's there's a transportation plan that shows our higher classifications of roadways. So expressways, major arterials, major corridors, that's the infrastructure that the city has planned to either build or upgrade in the future to accommodate the land use plan that's partnered with. So whenever we're looking at land use, you can't talk about land use without transportation. You can't talk about transportation without land use. And so whenever you're identifying an area that's planned for additional commercial or additional density, you want to make sure that your street infrastructure reflects the capacity for that. And so the thoroughfare plan may actually show a road that's currently classified as a local street or a minor collector being upgraded into in the future as a major collector or a arterial roadway to accommodate that growth. And it may not be there today, but it will be in the future through a future CIP project or some sort of other funding mechanism that the city's going to be responsible for. So that's an example of that.
So like on the
Infrastructure.
water side of it, how granular will the comprehensive plan get into addressing water needs? I mean, do they get? Yeah.
They'll typically show larger water mains, so those 12, 18, 24-inch pipes that really serve an area, and they won't get into the smaller service lines because that's site-specific, but they'll kind of get into the citywide distribution lines. And those need to be larger? Do they need to be extended? Okay. So that's the type of infrastructure.
So it's not a holistic plan in a sense. I mean, it's going to delve down into there'll be some detail to it. I mean, there'll be some
yes. Now,
specific detail.
Correct. Now, in the downtown plan, they will get more specific. They'll get more specific as to the size of the water lines and the width of the street and the width of the sidewalk. And so those smaller area plans do tend to get into the weeds of that, and they include a lot more design and detail, whereas the larger ones try to stay high level because we don't have a crystal ball. We don't always know the timing, but they say, okay, high level, this is what we intend to do. And so if that's what we intend, this is what's going to be needed to accommodate that. Does that answer?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you so much.
Something like, Regay Street is going to be, if the city continues to grow, it becomes, it's already a large thoroughfare for people. That would essentially be upgraded to a larger thoroughfare. I mean, not a larger, but a more high-use street eventually.
Possibly. So whenever you're looking at the design of roadways, it includes the number of travel lanes, it includes the number of signals. Maybe we could look at making certain corridors more pedestrian-oriented, incorporating bike lanes and sidewalks and things like that. And so that plan will help look at, okay, this roadway, depending on what classification that we want it to be, it's going to require this much right-of-way, typically this many lanes, and that can accommodate so much traffic. And so when we approve that through this planning process, and then you have a proposal that comes forward that says, okay, this area is designated for neighborhood retail or medium density. Well, I want to build a new shopping center here. Well, our plan doesn't accommodate for that type of capacity. And so it's either not in line with our plan, and so we're not going to promote that, or we need to evaluate this area again and see if we need to make a change to the plan because other conditions have changed or what have you. So we want to try to be as thoughtful as possible, but also understand that conditions change and the market changes. And so, but still looking at it in a holistic view to make sure that any change that we make, we look at the impacts of the neighboring properties, how that affects what we plan for down the street, and so forth and so on. All right. Where was I? Core topic. Yes, so the core topics. The fourth one is how much money will be earmarked for the planning process. So it's always, of course, important to look at what kind of budget should be included in the cost for preparing the plan, and that includes printing, photographs, maps, graphics, mail, advertising, supplies for community meetings, renting meeting places, refreshments, a lot of the logistical stuff that people typically don't think about whenever they think about the planning process, and specifically it's the people part. It's the meeting with the people, gathering that public input, and creating a space for that public engagement. That's why that piece is normally at least 30% of the cost, just because of all the logistics that come into play with that. And again, number 5, how will you involve all the community citizens? And this is a crucial part of the process. And again, a lot of that is specific to the community, specific to the plan, and specific to kind of the intent or purpose of whatever planning process that you're undergoing. If it's a comprehensive plan for the city, that's everyone. So you want to try to get everyone as involved as possible. If it's a neighborhood plan, it's the residents of that neighborhood. So it just kind of depends on your planning process and what your intentions are. And so when you're looking at the decisions that the community makes for this planning process, If you choose to meet the minimum requirements and no more, then you don't necessarily need a lot of people or a large budget. But if you're choosing a planning process that includes a higher degree of interaction and addresses a wider range of subject matter, that's going to be a more expensive, more intensive planning process. And so that's why you'll see budgets and processes vary from community to community because their efforts are a little bit different. Their engagement process may not be as intense or developed as one community over another. And so it's really difficult to have a apples to apples comparison whenever you're looking at those proposals because there's different values in those communities, and some communities choose to do the bare minimum when it comes to public engagement, and some communities choose to kind of go above and beyond. So that's why you can see a disparity in those different plans.
Generally speaking, sorry to interrupt again.
No, go ahead.
Should probably turn this on. Records. Just speaking about our public engagement so far, when we had the initial talks with the community, there was a lot of people that had signed up in order to either be on committees or either to volunteer. How has the engagement been so far concerning what they want to do in community involvement if we were to proceed with the plan?
So City Council approved the contract last month, So we are moving forward with the planning process. All those people that attended those community forums, they signed up for future updates. So we actually created a webpage and an email contact list. Anytime we have a committee meeting, anytime we update our planning page, we send out email blast. And so everyone who wanted to get notified of future anything related to the process, that's one way that they can get notified without having to do anything. It's very kind of proactive in that way. We also are putting everything on social media. We have our Friday update that gets shared with the local media group. And so we really try to be intentional about advertising for that as much as we can.
Sure.
Now, the committee members have been essentially selected for the comp plan committee and the downtown plan committee. We do anticipate that there will be subcommittees or special groups to help go into different sectors of the community to kind of garner that input that we normally wouldn't get from a traditional public hearing process. But that public engagement plan hasn't been finalized yet.
Right.
So we're kind of still in the preliminary phases of that.
But has there been a lot of response and people wanting to volunteer to do things once we enact?
Yes.
Okay, good.
There's been people wanting to get involved. For example, Matt Moore actually donated $1,000 to the city to develop a planning library. And so we've actually asked that the consultant provide a list of books. And so that's one thing that we're going to be incorporating. Once we get the project website up, we'll actually include a list of free online educational resources for the community that include free publications, links to articles, different types of just educational resources, and that'll be something that we push out to the community as well. And there will be opportunities for people to volunteer for future maybe neighborhood walking tours, or we'll have a meeting in a box, or someone can take a meeting in a box to your local church or your local professional networking group and actually conduct your own meetings. And so we'll have a lot of different ways that people can participate in the process that aren't kind of what you would traditionally see,
Sure.
like we've done in the past.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
And we'll share that with you as it comes.
Okay.
So we'll be sure to push that out, because when these recommendations come forward, they'll come forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission first, and then the City Council, so you guys are an integral step to that process. So we'll keep you as informed as we can.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so what do we have? It's essential, like I said, to have an accurate, current information and data on the community as it is now before you determine what you want and how to move forward. And so again, it's important to have that data in order to plan to maintain and to plan to change, or any other planning efforts that you want to undertake as far as preservation, growth, or just change in general. So again, these are often called background reports or data analysis, and it's the first step in the planning process. Oftentimes, you'll see that citizens or local officials want to move beyond this step and get into real planning and decision-making. However, it's important to recognize that you have to have a firm foundation of information about your community and convey the importance of that foundation to people who are participating, so that way you can help them understand that that there is a place to build off of. And this is normally in the form of an executive summary in the beginning of each section. And for a good plan, it's presented in an easy form and format that's easily digestible as a part of this process that we're doing is actually trying to create a plan that's more user-friendly, that's more readable, that people can understand, versus reading off as a super formal kind of legalese planning document. Let's see, all right, so, and if I've gone through these slides, I think we're still on track, yes. All right, so what do you want? This is that phase where you're really looking at creating that vision for the community. And so again, the contents of the plan must reflect the vision along with the strategies to achieve and policies to direct the daily decision making. So you asked the question, what do you want the community to be? And this is normally, again, expressed in a vision statement. So you'll find there's a vision statement at the beginning of our comprehensive plan. Some people call it a theme, overall goals. Usually your goals kind of stem from that vision statement. And these can be expressed in words, illustrations, but there is some form of visioning that happens, and that's whenever you're garnering that public input and trying to create those expectations of the different desires of the community, and again, balancing those interests. And so you have to weigh, again, those proposals against what you can actually do and what can be achieved and what's best for the whole community. All right, so how do you get there? So plan, as we've seen and we've talked about several times, is a little value if it's not implemented. And so how does this happen? Again, the vision is that core that everything stems from, contains the description of the future direction and long-term goals. It usually includes maps to illustrate the future land use, to illustrate future transportation plans, to illustrate future utilities, in areas that maybe should be protected or that are fragile, such as historic districts, environmental areas that need to be protected because of their value, whether that's environmental or character in nature. Again, the comprehensive plan is kind of like a new house. It doesn't just happen. You have to have construction drawings, a budget, money to fund the budget, construction program, permits, contractors. It takes a lot to build a house, just like it takes a lot to implement a comprehensive plan, like we talked about earlier, capital improvement projects, incentives for development, special programs, grants, all these things work together to facilitate the implementation of that project. Again, streets, sidewalks, water, utilities, these are all things that typically are included in implementation plans whenever we're looking at trying to create a desired future. Yes?
You know, do they look at the existing infrastructure and say this is antiquated, it needs to be updated, or it doesn't support, it won't support where we're wanting to go?
Yes, so that's part of that, looking where we're at, that kind of initial, so whenever they're in, I was trying to keep it high level, but I will get into the weeds a little bit. So whenever you're looking at those existing conditions, gathering that scientific data to look at where the city's at, it includes demographics, it includes population, it includes your housing market, it also includes your existing infrastructure. So looking at what utilities you have, where you have them, what kind of condition they're in, same thing with streets. And so historically, City of Nacogdoches has been challenged with aging infrastructure. And so one of the things that we're going to look at is, okay, where is our infrastructure at? What kind of condition that it's in? And do we need to focus on fixing what we have or focus on growing and expanding that infrastructure? And so that's always been a difficult conversation to have, again, because of competing interest, because we want to promote growth and development, but also we want to make sure that we're still serving the residents that are here and making sure that we're maintaining that high quality of water, sewer, streets, so forth and so on. And so that's a conversation that City Council has every year whenever they're looking at approving budgets for future infrastructure. They're looking at the roadways, they're looking at the rating, and where we can best use our assets and our funds to get the best, essentially, bang for our buck. So that's what the comprehensive plan does too. It looks at your overall infrastructure and your needs and says, all right, based on the resources that we have, where can we best utilize those resources to get a higher return on investment? And so planning to plan can actually save you money in the long run. I know there tends to be competing thoughts and opinions about spending money on a plan, but essentially that's one of the benefits of a plan is that it can actually save you money in the long term by allowing you to plan to utilize your resources better. Maybe you could have, I like to akin it to, I think I've mentioned this before, triage, where you're trying to stop the bleeding, essentially.
It's a physical of where we are, a health check.
Yes.
I think you
Yeah, and then that versus kind of doing an overall health wellness check to identify, okay, what are the underlying issues that we can address that maybe could resolve some of these other things. And so, yes, does that answer your?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
I forgot what the question was.
No. Well, it's understanding where we are today, a
Yes.
baseline of where we are today, I mean, you know.
That's core to the process.
Well, let me ask you
Yeah.
this too, because in a DTJ could be doing this analysis for us, but in terms of cost benefit analysis of where they're actually putting these infrastructures or spending the money on it, who's doing that? Every year when city council meets and says this is going to give us more bang for the buck, because I know as our city manager is looking to improve roadways, he is looking at a grading structure and seeing where you could cut costs by putting a little bit of a patch there or paving the whole thing. But yeah, how do we determine that?
Yeah, and unfortunately, my city engineer is actually at another meeting, but I know enough to make me dangerous, so I'll try to answer that as best we can. So my understanding is that right now, when we're going through this annual budgeting process, it's not so much of a return on investment, it's more of a needs assessment. Here's where we're at, and here's the highest needs based on the traffic volume, based on the population, and based on the rating. And so that's, my understanding is that's how we've been looking at it currently, is a needs kind of assessment and trying to address the roads that have the highest needs.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
it does.
So this comprehensive planning process will allow us to kind of step back and do that higher level look in a holistic way that maybe we haven't had the resources to do before.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you,
Yeah.
I don't want to derail your
Oh, no, this is
presentation,
part of the,
but,
I'm glad, there's a lot of great questions.
Is there any clarity on what might be available fund-wise or grant-wise through the infrastructure bill that was passed last year?
So,
Congress?
no, I mean, not specifically, so I'll speak to that, and then I'll speak to grants in general. So the city does actively pursue grants for various things, for sidewalks, for street infrastructure, for utilities, for parks, for historic preservation, for all the different types of social services. And whenever we're applying for these grants, it's very competitive. And communities are scored based on certain criteria. One of those being, do you have current updated plans? Because they want to see where you're spending your money and seeing, are you being good stewards of these public funds that we're giving you? And so if you have an updated plan that says, hey, you know what, we just, we went through and did an analysis of where we're at right now. We recently got the community to buy in on these different projects because it improves our overall quality of life. That gives you a much higher rating and a much higher likelihood of actually getting grant funding than you would if you wouldn't have a plan. So that's kind of number one. Second, the new infrastructure bill, based on what I've read, a lot of what they're looking at is different incentives for communities who promote diverse and attainable housing. A lot of people, I've heard a lot of comments about this move towards what's the word I'm looking for? Making single family legal, essentially, which is, I think that's a misinterpretation of whenever you look at the funding. It's really if you take proactive action to include more diversity in your housing market, to create more mixed housing, then you open up to more funding. But it's not it's a carrot approach. It's not a stick where you're going to get penalized for not including more multifamily zoning, or it's going to essentially come in and require you to upzone properties. It's more of a, hey, we want to kind of promote this mixed housing because we see that there is a housing issue nationwide. Some areas more so than others, but it's a way to kind of address that housing shortage that we see and promote a carrot approach versus. But as far as the details, I don't have that information at this
I
time.
don't know
But
if anybody does.
Sorry.
it's been kind of a back and forth. Things change all the time.
And that's,
So.
sorry, just to speak on that a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a whole shortage across the nation.
Yes.
Because there aren't enough construction, skilled expertise and also planning for whatever has come our way. And so when you speak about grants, we currently, in our size of a city, we have one grant writer, correct?
We really don't even have a grant writer.
Okay.
We have different staff members that are kind of scattered throughout staff who do the grant writing for their particular departments. At one point in time, we did have a grants administrator, but that position has evolved into a much more multifaceted, multifunctional position. So we do not have a kind of standalone dedicated grants coordinator, grant writer. There's people who kind of serve that role
Okay.
within various departments.
Okay.
At one point in time, the planning department, whenever Larissa Philpott was the city planner, they were administering the home program, which is a program that actually helped people, especially first-time homeowners, to either build first-time homes or acquire first-time homes. And then there were requirements on how long you had to stay in that home and kind of restrictions on funding and things like that. It's a very time-intensive process, and so we stopped administering that grant,
Right.
essentially, because we didn't have the staff. And so that's one of the things that when we're looking at these implementation strategies, how many of these can be achieved through grants, and do we have the staff to actually write the grants?
Right.
There's actually businesses and companies that you can pay to do that grant for you. The city actually, I think last month or the month before, we approved a contract for a company to actually administer some of our FEMA grant monies for us, because it's such a time-intensive process that instead of hiring full-time staff, we just outsource that.
Sure.
So some cities do that, and so that may be something that we look at when we're looking at implementing, is setting aside funding to outsource some of that grant administration that
Okay.
can be achieved. So
And
there's
the-
different ways to.
Sorry.
No, I was just
Oh,
gonna
yeah,
tell
no.
these folks that we're going through a working session, so they're educating us on comprehensive plan and other things. So we'll begin regular session at 5:00,
Yes.
so.
And so we may pause this and then bring it back after the regular if the commission wants, so we can, so we don't have anyone waiting on us.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wanted to speak about too, in supporting this master plan and the downtown master plan, is that, to receive grants you have to have an updated plan, just like you had said. But are we tracking, and can we track how many outputs of actual grant proposals we write for the city, and then how much we actually get back, historically speaking? Because if we are, I know it's really competitive to receive those, but that is just something I've been curious about as well.
Yeah, the new ladder truck that the city purchased, that was through a grant, and part of that grant was actually additional fire personnel, but that only lasts for so many years, and so whenever you're looking at some of the strings that are attached to those grants, it might be good funding on a temporary basis, but what are the long-term impacts of that?
Sure.
So if we get 3 new firefighters for 3 years, well, eventually we got to pick up the bill for those three firefighters. So there's a lot of grants like that come with kind of unfunded mandates post-grant. And so I know the fire department does a lot of that for equipment, for kind of personnel type things, parks and recreation. They have a lot of grant programs, historic preservation, streets. We write a lot of grants for sidewalks, those TxDOT projects. Those are grants that the city submits to TxDOT for that sidewalk construction. And so I don't think we have like a unified kind of grant database that we've been maintaining, but it's certainly something that we can look into. If there's a specific type of grant or program that you're interested in, but maybe through this process, we can look at how the city's allocating or utilizing those resources.
Absolutely.
And a lot of our budget is offset with grants.
Yeah.
So a lot of these improvements that you see built, those are through grants.
Yeah, and I would really like to see that, because, if you are working with limited budget and you are able to receive grants, that's just a no-brainer for me. But that's why tracking metrics, like how does that look and what does that mean for spending money within a city to have that specific position available to implement these plans that are actually going to come from a comprehensive plan.
And you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, so if you look online, we have our budget document, and it'll actually provide a breakdown of where our funding sources come from, and that includes property tax, sales tax, utility
tax,
revenue, and then grants. I don't know if it breaks it down by like department or not, but I can take a look and see, and maybe that's information that it can be readily accessed by our finance department.
Okay.
So we'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry to derail you.
Oh, no, you're fine. All right. So, again, how do we get there? That's the implementation phase of the comprehensive plan process, so more detailed plans for systems such as streets, sidewalks, utilities. These often include capital budgets for outlining what facilities will be built, where they'll be built, how much that they'll cost. And on the other side of that, the city also implements regulations to implement our comprehensive plan. So that includes land development regulations, zoning codes, subdivision ordinances, to implement some of those strategies that are usually outlined in a comprehensive plan. Programming, I mentioned it before, housing rehabilitation, beautification, historic preservation, those are a lot of tools that are used to implement the goals that are outlined in cities' comprehensive plans. Purchase of environmental lands for protection, acquisition of parkland for various things. And so whenever we're looking at citywide, these are some of the things that are in our comprehensive plan, but they're also common to other communities: economic development, capital improvements, historic preservation, environmental protection, and then they always include language about development codes and adopting or updating development codes to implement those different strategies. All right, take a small water break. All right, so in order to be effective, the plan must be clear, easy to read, and able to understand by everyone. If you look through our current comprehensive plan, it was written in the early 2000s and still kind of a style that you see from the 90s. It's not necessarily intuitive, and so you see a shift now to almost a magazine-style comprehensive plan that really does have a much better flow, and it's much more intuitive for the average reader. It usually has a reduction in jargon. All of the detailed scientific information is at the end in the appendix, so as you're reading it, it reads much more like a story, or much more, I guess, much less technical than what you would see in some past plans, especially our current one. And so whenever we're looking at updating the plan, we want to make sure that it not only has good information, but it's easy to understand and that everyone can understand it. And so there's 6 common criteria that communities use whenever they're evaluating if a plan is effective or not. Number 1, of course, based on the vision. Is it based on the vision of what the community wants to be in the future? Does it describe that future condition or state? A vision, again, is very similar to a goal in that it describes an end result. But more specific, it has aspirational characteristics that describe, in essence, what we want to be. And so they do tend to be aspirational because it's our best future. And so you do have some creativity to maybe wish for something or have a statement that can seem a little bit unrealistic, because we always want to move for improvement. We want to move for something better than what we are. But again, you want that grounded in data. You want that grounded in strategies that are implementable, and you want it to be meaningful in terms of citizen involvement. So there's several ways to evaluate the involvement of citizens in the planning process. You know, we talked earlier, there's different strategies that include community forums, public workshops, online surveys, public hearings such as this, but these traditionally don't garner as much of a diverse cross-section of the community. And so when we're looking at new comprehensive plan strategies, especially in ours, we're going to be looking at neighborhood workshops, actually going into the community with these meetings in a box, going to the local church groups, to the schools, to those local civic groups, and actually meeting people where they are, versus expecting people to come to us in some sort of public platform. Because there's some people who will never come to a meeting, but they may reply to an online survey, or there's some people who will never apply to an online survey, but they'll always come to a community meeting. So you want to make sure that you capture both of those. You want to make sure that the plan is consistent. All parts of the plan work towards the same vision. You want to make sure that it's realistic, that you actually can create those results that you've identified in your plan, not only as far as financially, but human resources, timing, and the long-term maintenance and implementation. Part of that is, again, number 5, financially feasible. Simply stated, do you have the funds and financial mechanisms to ensure that the projects can actually be achieved? And then number 6, that it's appropriate in terms of objectives, policies, and strategies. so that you can continue to use it as an effective guide to decision-making. One way to assess the effectiveness of that is to look at the different elements and make sure that they're all kind of speaking to the same vision. So you have your utilities, transportation, land use, historic preservation, and they're all going to have different goals and objectives, but they should all be kind of catered towards that same vision. So you have a common theme through all the different sections. All right, and after implementation, so I don't know how many times I've heard through this process that plans just gather dust on a shelf. And in some communities, that's a very real thing, unfortunately. And so without an implementation step, that's exactly what can happen to a lot of comprehensive plans. So it's important that you complete the planning process with implementation of key strategies. And so what's unique about the comprehensive plan process that we're undertaking is that you're going to have your downtown plan and your comprehensive plan, which also includes the I-69 corridor and a housing needs assessment. And then all of those are going to work together to create a comprehensive implementation strategy. So instead of doing all these plans separately and having a implementation plan for each, they're done at different times, a holistic implementation strategy that includes all of the plans really is something different that you don't see in a lot of communities, and can find and identify areas where you can implement multiple strategies at once, where you can achieve multiple goals with limited funding, and where you essentially can implement the plan quicker and cheaper than you can if you try to do all those things separately. All right, and so the just want to wrap it up with outlining that the planning process is a continuing process. These plans are not static. They change over time, just like the community changes over time. They can grow, they can decline. You know, people move in and out, new roads and utilities get built, the economy changes, lifestyles change, the values of the community change, and so the plan should change as well. And so there's two main reasons to amend the plan. One is to keep the overall direction represented by the plan, so to make sure that your plan still reflects the current values of the community. And the other is based on changing conditions. And so if you look at the past 10 years, there's been a lot of changing conditions in the community. You can look at, I think in 2003 was when the current comp plan was adopted. The iPhone didn't exist until 2005. And so just when you look at the technology changes that we've had, the political changes, the way that people shop, the way they travel, it's really important that your current plan is founded in that updated technical data that we talked about earlier. And so before we end the discussion, I just want to touch on what comprehensive planning is not. And so again, it's not static. It is meant to be edited over time. And the comprehensive plan is not zoning. So it stays at that 30,000 foot level. And so when you look at the comprehensive plan, it's meant to illustrate a desired future growth pattern. It's not meant to be a parcel by parcel specific mandate of how property should be developed. It doesn't force immediate change. It's just a visual guide. There's nothing in the comprehensive plan that's going to require someone to change what they can do on their property or not. It's not a silver bullet. It's not an end-all be-all to all societal problems in our community. And they do often include kind of large aspirational changes because we want to plan for big picture scenario. And so that's why, you'll see some of those larger aspirational items in the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan does identify needs. So it'll identify gaps in infrastructure. It'll identify gaps in housing. It'll identify who we are and where we want to be. That's that vision statement. And again, it balances the priorities of the people that live in the community with the built environment, natural environment, the community's history and local culture, and then the future. And so we began on a quote, so I'll end with a quote. This is from Socrates. "By far the greatest and most admirable form of wisdom is that needed to plan and beautify cities and human communities." So I thought that was a nice gesture as we wrap up the discussion for the comprehensive plan and visioning process. And so with that, I'll take any questions from the commission. I know we asked a lot of questions during the presentation, which is perfect, but are there any questions or Any of these slides that you guys wanted me to go back over before we move on to the next one? No? All right, Ken, it's 4:55. Do we want to break, start the regular, and then finish the
Yeah.
second workshop at the
Yeah,
end?
policy discussion part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that
Okay.
after. I think that's a good idea. So we'll take a 5-minute break and start again at 5.
Does anybody have any questions out there? Okay.
All kinds of benefits, including online resources for educational materials, discounts for conferences and workshops. And then independent of that, there are just the workshops and trainings and conferences that are organized by the American Planning Association that you don't have to be a member for, but they do tend to be a little bit extra as far as fees. So the state has a state planning conference every year. Each state has their own. And then there's a national planning conference. And so I think the information you sent me was about the,
There's an APA national conference, and then there
Yes.
was one in Oklahoma City.
yes. So the national planning conference is in San Diego this year.
I'll go.
The city does, we don't actually currently have any funding. So staff doesn't even go to the national planning conference because it's very expensive.
Yeah.
So I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at this upcoming budget, looking at requesting some additional funds for training for the commissioners. And I think, based on the interest, I've seen it done where commissioners rotate on an annual basis. So maybe 2 commissioners go one year, 3 commissioners go the next, depending on kind of pre-selected conferences. The national planning conferences are great, but they don't do as good of a job as providing information on local issues. The state conferences are really good, and they're a little bit more focused as far as things that Texas is dealing with specifically.
Sure.
So that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Is to go to state ones because they focus on topics that Texas is dealing with. The national planning ones are great. They're always in really cool cities, San Diego and New York and New Orleans, and they do a good job of covering kind of like national planning trends. But some of the stuff that you'll come across are things that maybe don't necessarily apply to our community, or things that we're just not ready for yet. So those are my 2 cents. But
Perfect.
by show of hands, how many of the commissioners are interested in memberships to American Planning Association, attending future conferences on different specific topics?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Well, depends
You
on
too.
whether-
All right, so that's something that we'll explore in this upcoming budget. Now, you guys are free to attend those things on your own. We just don't currently have the budget for that. But that's something that we'll look at and seeing what other kinds of maybe resources that we can provide you that maybe are a discounted rate, maybe reading materials. APA actually has a lot of publications for their members. And so I think that in and of itself would be a really great resource for you guys to kind of look and do things on your own. There's a monthly magazine that they issue that talks about general planning topics. They have they used to have a publication specific for commissioners, but they haven't published that one in a while. But there's still a lot of great material out there, so we'll look at that. But we wanted to mention to the group to see what kind of interest there was in participating in those types of training opportunities.
And I also spoke to Elena. I know that, of course, Nacogdoches is on a tight budget, and we know, we're volunteers for this position. It's just anything to inform us and get the knowledge base so that we can make better informed decisions. But I also spoke to her about if you're really interested in there's a city shortfall in the budget, which probably there will be, to actually fund some of it ourselves if we're really interested in doing it. And maybe HCH student pilots who become pilots can take us to the next event. Just saying, throwing that out there.
You know the boss, call her. Not me.
All right. Thank you for talking about that.
Okay, so we're moving on to number 4 in the agenda, which is our open forum. In addition to the public comment on agenda items, commission offers an open forum whereby citizens may comment on governance issues over which the city of Nacogdoches has domain in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. Members of the commission are not allowed to discuss, deliberate, or make decisions on topics not posted as an agenda item. But any speakers wishing to make a comment are able to address remarks to the commission and are asked to limit their remarks to no more than 3 minutes. Does anybody have a open forum item? Nope? Okay. Moving on to the consent agenda. Looks like the only item on the consent agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 10th meeting. Anybody have any edits or comments? I think they looked correct to me. Any, and if there are no comments, I'll make a motion to pass all the items on the consent agenda, including the minutes.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion, comments from anyone out there who wants to talk about the minutes? No? Okay. All those in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All right, all those against, say nay. Oh, we passed. All right, moving on to the regular agenda. City Council will receive staff recommendations, public input on the following items, and may deliberate and take formal action on each item. We didn't have anything removed from the consent agenda under A, so we're moving to B, which is the public hearing, which is to consider a request for approval of the zone change from R3 two-family to B2 general business for a portion of Lot 1A1, City Block 60 and 61, generally located at 2824 Northwest Stallings Drive. And the request has been submitted by Genuine BTD Ltd, or Limited, I guess I should say. Case file ZON 2022-01.
All right, thank you. Elena Helton, City Planner. And so as stated, this is a request for a zone change from R3 two-family to B2 general business. This application is accompanied by a application for a specific use permit for RV sales facility, case number SUP 2022-01. And so this is a existing RV sales facility that was developed back in 2003. They've been operating at this location ever since. The reason that the zone change is being requested is that the applicant is actually proposing to replace an existing metal shed that's interior to the property with new wash bays. Now, because the property was developed back in 2003, it was done prior to the requirement in our zoning ordinance that says that RV sales facilities actually require a specific use permit, even in zoning districts that are zoned B2. And so first the property has to be zoned B2, and then on top of that, they have to get approval of a specific use permit through City Council for RV sales facilities. And so this business was grandfathered in, and so the addition, however, triggers the need to update the zoning to the B2, and then in addition, get approval of that specific use permit. And so you'll see that about half the property is actually already zoned commercial, and the other half is zoned R3 two-family. However, this has kind of been a unified development since 2003, with the buildings actually being primarily on the front half and kind of the storage area being on the back half. So this is the proposed site plan. We'll get into more detail on the SUP, but I just wanted to show you for reference what they're proposing as part of that. And so this is, again, an existing RV sales facility. The only addition or change is going to be this new wash bay that's located interior, and they are proposing to bring the property up to current development standards as far as commercial streetscaping and commercial screening adjacent to residential properties. But just wanted to go ahead and show you guys that for reference. The property does have a split future land use designation, the front half being commercial, which really follows that zoning district boundary line, and then the other half being single family. The zone change really essentially will just bring the property into compliance. It's already developed as commercial. It's not actually going to create an expansion of the commercial boundaries of the property, essentially. So the boundary of the commercial activity, the commercial use will stay the same. Essentially, it's just bringing the zoning up to code. These are just some site photos of the property. So in the front there, you see the street view. So as you're coming into the property from Northwest Stallings Drive, you'll see they have a lot of inventory in the front. That's kind of their outdoor sales display area. On the lower right, that's some of their customer parking. In this picture, you see that's their storefront office area. That's where customers come in and they talk to employees. They check in for RV maintenance and so on and so forth. But that's their storefront. These pictures are the service building in the back. So they have large bay areas where they bring RVs in for maintenance or renovation or so forth and so on. This is actually a view of that northern property line. So there is an existing chain link fence that separates the commercial business from that residential subdivision to the north. With the SUP that you're going to hear in a minute, they're actually going to be replacing that chain link fence with a 6-foot wooden fence and a landscape buffer to bring it up to commercial screening standards. This is just another segment of that fence as you move east along the northern property line. And just some additional photos of some of that existing residential development that's located to the north and fronts West Austin Street. This is that northeast property line. So one of the things that you'll notice in the SUP and some of the other photos as we get into it is there's actually a very large existing like natural landscape buffer along the eastern boundary of the property and a southern portion. And so instead of tearing down that landscaping and building a new fence, they're actually proposing to preserve about 100 feet of that area on the eastern side and about 30 feet on the south side to create a natural visible screen in lieu of building a fence, and you'll see that. But these are just some images as you kind of move towards that way. This is a better picture of that eastern view and southeast property line that shows that existing vegetation that's going to be preserved. Again, this is that southern boundary showing more of that existing natural buffer. This is on the upper left, that's a photo of the property immediately to the south. It's a residential house, but it's zoned commercial. So essentially they wouldn't have to buffer from this property, and the idea is in the future this property would redevelop. It's actually got commercial on the other side as well, and so it is more appropriate for commercial development, especially with direct frontage on the Northwest Stallings Drive. And then on the lower right, that's just an image of the commercial business across the street, just kind of showing you the commercial character of the area and the corridor. As part of this process, we did notify 14 property owners within the 200-foot area. We also notified property owners within 500 feet with courtesy postcards. There were signs put on the property, and then we followed our online and social media postings. We did get one letter back from a property owner to the north of one of the vacant lots that front West Austin Street, and she lives in Dallas. We did call her, and her main concern was that her property taxes might go up because the value actually may go up because of the development. We explained to her what was being proposed. She didn't have any problems with what they were actually doing. It was just a general concern of increased property taxes. Now, these are the conditions for approval whenever the Planning and Zoning Commission considers a zone change. They include things like compatibility, ensuring orderly growth and development, ensuring that the development has supporting facilities, adequate drives and parking, that any nuisances are reduced, that there's adequate lighting, landscaping, and that the proposal is in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Based on those findings that we talked about in the presentation and those in the staff report, staff is recommending approval of the zone change. This item is going to be heard by City Council on March 1st, and the applicant is also in attendance if the commission has any questions. But with that, I'll conclude the presentation and open it up for questions from the commission.
Can you clarify on the, the 2003 comprehensive plan? Is it, really single-family residential in that area?
Yes, and essentially, you'll notice that it follows, at least the commercial piece follows the commercial zoning. And so it identifies that as a commercial corridor. And so if we look at the future land use map and then go back to the zoning, you can see that essentially follows the district boundaries. I know that whenever the comprehensive plan update was done, there was some city-initiated zone changes along our commercial corridors. And so essentially, Northwest Stallings, Northeast Stallings, portions of North Street and South Street were essentially rezoned by the city as commercial. And then other areas that were designated as single-family or commercial. So some were city-initiated, and then some were done privately, but essentially, the answer is yes. That area is designated as single-family, largely undeveloped. There is a little bit of single-family. You see that fronts right onto West Austin Street, but largely those are undeveloped tracts. There's a couple of manufactured homes, but other than that, it's, yes, ma'am.
Duplexes, townhouses right behind in that, in single family. Right past that, going east, what is that there? Do you know?
If you keep going east, there's a planned development, but it's like way east.
Right.
There's actually an intersection that's been undeveloped for some time because there's extreme terrain issues there.
Okay.
And
The Old
so,
Tyler Road intersection?
oh gosh.
I think it's Old Tyler Road.
So Tyler and West Austin.
Thank you, yes. So Old Tyler and West Austin, a lot of those properties have issues with access to utilities because of the terrain. And so that's why you see some of these areas largely undeveloped. And then just east of that, there's a couple of planned developments, Austin Hill subdivision, the new senior center. But a lot of the, I think, reasons why you see some of these properties still vacant is the cost to develop them can be extreme when you're looking at some of the dirt work and engineering that's involved.
Sure. And this is slated to have I-69 corridor run through it, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so when we're looking at updating the comp plan, one of the things that we'll be evaluating is the comprehensive future land use plan. And if these areas should still be designated as single family, should they be maybe changed to a different category? Maybe should there be a new category that we don't even have to address a mix of housing or neighborhood retail? Some of
Could be
these,
an exit ramp going right through the middle of it, too.
Could be.
You never
yeah.
know.
Question is just more from my own understanding. It's already being used as commercial, so what?
It is.
Yeah.
So what's the,
Yeah, so it's the addition, so they're making a change, they're adding a new building, and that's what's triggering the zoning. If they were keeping everything the same,
keep going?
then they could just be allowed to continue.
But this is
in
property they
perpetuity.
already own, right?
Yes, ma'am, and they've owned it since 2003. It's just that it's grandfathered because of when it was built, and so the change is requiring it to come up to certain codes, and so that's why you see the zone change in the accompanying SUP. But they are actually proposing to bring everything up to current code and provide some additional amenities that aren't there today, so.
I was just curious
Yeah.
about that. No, I don't have any issues.
Any other questions for Elena?
I'm gonna keep it on this map for the public hearing portion.
All right. Since this is a public hearing, if there's any comments from members of the public or from the applicant, free to come up and please introduce yourself with your name.
Hi, my name is Russell Bird, and I'm representing Genuine RV. The only thing I wanted to kind of clarify to Miss Elena is, could you put the slideshow on where it said 4,000 foot wash bay, if you don't mind?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I just want to clarify something, so it's not, that red square there, I just want to clarify, there's an existing wash bay there, the one that was there prior to the ownership in 2003. I believe the building and the development was done in the 70s. And so the current wash bay rack is there. The building, we're putting in PDI service bays. And essentially, all we're doing with the wash bay is putting over an awning kind of along the building on that. So I want y'all to know it's not additional drainage or plumbing issues or anything like that to go with it. So it's not as extensive as I don't want it to look like that's a 4,000-foot wash bay facility, because that's really not what that's gonna be. But we're gonna have it covered from the existing new bays. So that's all I wanted to clarify there, so. all right,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other comments for the public hearing? Any questions from anyone on the commission for the applicant? No? Okay. Well, we'll close the public hearing portion. Any discussion on the, or further questions if you have one for Ms. Hilton?
I do not have any.
No? Okay.
I can make a motion.
Go ahead.
I make a motion to approve it.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion to approve, this is ZON 202201, as written. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Berg. Moving on to agenda item 6C. This is to consider a request for approval of a specific use permit for recreational vehicle sales. Wait a minute. Did I
So
get the
same.
same one again?
Yes,
this
so
is for
the
the
first
wash
item was
bay.
a zone
Oh, this is for the
change,
wash
this is
bay.
the specific use permit.
Okay.
So they're partner items.
Thought I was reading the wrong one. For lot 1A1, city block 60 and 61. It's generally located again at 2824 Northwest Stallings Drive, and this request has been submitted by Genuine BTD Limited. This is case file SUP 2022-01.
All right, thank you, Elaine Elton. Yes, this is the same property that we just heard in the previous agenda item. This is existing RV sales facility. And thank you, Russ, for the clarification. So this is a quote-unquote replacement of an existing structure, so they're not adding necessarily any new building coverage, any new impervious area. There are some old existing metal sheds. This is going to be an upgrade of the facility to some new service bays. Again, there's no real expansion of building footprint or the actual footprint of the use, but this change does trigger requirement for an SUP. The city adopted the requirement for specific use permits for RV sales facilities in 2014. So whenever this development was constructed, that requirement didn't exist. However, the change, the addition or replacement triggers that compliance with a specific use permit. And so whenever we're looking at the exhibit, and we looked at some site photos earlier, but you'll notice that what you noticed was there's no street trees along that frontage road. So for new commercial development, they are required to provide trees along that street frontage. It's a beautification requirement. It's based on your street frontage. The applicant is proposing to plant trees in accordance with that. They're also proposing to bring the property up to code as far as residential screening requirements. So what you see on the northern side, there's that heavy red line. That's where they're going to be installing a new 6-foot wooden fence and a landscape buffer. And then the large green buffer, that's where they're going to be preserving that existing natural vegetation to satisfy the screening requirement. And so staff is recommending approval. We did, again, get one letter from the adjacent property owner to the north. Again, she didn't have any concerns about the actual development or impacts of the development. Her main concern was the potential for her property taxes that might be increased due to the change. And so again, the property is currently zoned B2 and R3. When this goes to council, the zone change will go first. And so if the zone change is approved, then the specific use permit can also be approved. Again, the future land use does split this property in between commercial and residential. Those are the same photos that we just looked at earlier. So I'll go through those. But again, with that, conclude staff's presentation and open up for any questions from the commission.
This is essentially a housekeeping detail, is
Yes,
that
ma'am. Mm-hmm. And essentially, it's a win-win for the city, because we're getting an improvement on an existing commercial business and a property that's coming into full compliance with our development codes.
So the specific use permit it'll apply to both lots though, is that correct?
Yes. It's actually one lot, but it's split by two city blocks. And so the description is strange. You don't normally have that kind of scenario. But it's essentially 1A1, and there's two city blocks that split the lot in two.
Okay.
But yes, it'll apply to the entire boundary of the property.
Okay. And the intent, I guess, behind requiring a specific use permit is, we don't do this for any other like dealerships, right?
We do this for all RV sales facilities.
Just RVs?
Yes, and so the idea is that RV sales facilities are a little bit different than a car sales facility, and so they may be appropriate in commercial districts, but we don't want them along North Street or along South Street or some of our more retail-oriented, pedestrian-oriented types of commercial development. So they're appropriate in certain scenarios, maybe with some additional site conditions. So that's the rationale for the specific use permit.
Okay. And the specific use permit on this will be like any other specific use permit, where if you stop using it for 180 days, it reverts to the just B2 zoning at that point.
Yes, so the SUP doesn't actually change the zoning. If the property owner were to vacate the business or abandon the business or sell it and it turned into something else, after 6 months, the specific use permit goes away. But it'll still be zoned commercial. So it could be potentially changed to something else in the future that was also allowed in B2.
Okay. Are there any special conditions placed on these, the special use permits for RV dealerships by code, or is it just or by ordinance, or is it just kind of you just have to have a specific use permit?
Yeah, there's no specific site design standards in our ordinance that are unique to these types of facilities. But one of the things that we worked with the property owner on was to bring it at least into minimum compliance with just any other commercial standard. So the streetscaping, the screening, making sure it's got enough parking, so that way at least, it met the same standards as a new commercial. But no, there are a number of land uses that do have supplementary standards, kind of above and beyond, like nightclubs, bed and breakfast, some other uses that may have the potential to create nuisances in certain areas, but RV sales isn't one of them.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Helt? No? Any questions for the applicant? No? Okay. Any public comments? We'll open it up for public comment. Okay. So seeing nobody interested in commenting on this, if any member of the commission would like to make a motion, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept this specific use permit for the property in question.
I'll second that. So we have a motion to approve the, let me read it out correctly here. The specific use permit for RV sales for Lot 1A1, which is in City Block 1661 of the city of Nacogdoches, and that's case file SUP 2022-01. All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. All right, motion carries. Thank you. And moving on to agenda item 6D. This is to consider a request for approval of a site plan, and this is a public hearing, for a plan development district for lot 12A, City Block 40, at 817 North Mound Street. This request was submitted by Hetty Legg and Associates LLC, and its case file PD 2022-01.
All right, thank you, Elena Helton, city planner. Again, this property is located at 817 North Mound. This is the site plan approval for the planned development district. This is the final stage of the plan development process. So the current PD process includes the initial concept plan, which establishes the district. That's reviewed and approved by both the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. And then you have the development plan, which is a more detailed plan that shows preliminary locations of building, parking, landscaping, things of that nature. And that also gets approved by City Council. And then we're at the site plan phase, which essentially are the construction drawings and final site plan for the development before it begins construction, and this gets approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Again, this table just kind of shows you the order and phase of the process, concept, development, and then site plan. The development plan was approved in September of 2021, establishing the district, and that included a plan that outlined the location of parking, landscaping, screening, and the existing buildings. The PD was approved with certain conditions. These included that any uses of the property would be limited to multifamily apartments, storage, medical office, and associated therapy services. And more specifically, that there would not be any new buildings or expansions of existing buildings permitted. So the two structures that you see there, one of them is an existing multifamily structure that's going to be renovated into future office medical buildings. And the smaller building is an existing duplex / storage building that'll be continued to be used in that. But this site plan that we're about to look at actually doesn't increase the footprint of these buildings at all. It essentially is just a interior renovation of the existing larger building, some exterior improvements, and then site improvements, including parking and landscaping. Some of the other conditions outlined were related to screening, specifically along the south side of the property, and that included the proposal by the applicant to repair, replace, and maintain an existing wooden fence located along the south side of the property, and then extend that fence to North Mound Street, but build the fence around a row of trees that was between those two different properties, so to maintain kind of that natural vegetation. And that any new fence would comply with our current standards. And so in the image you see on your screen, that yellow is the existing fence, which at the time was thought to be located on the shared property line. And then there's a orange dotted line, and that was the new fence to be built around the trees connecting to North Mound, and then some new landscaping along North Mound to meet current standards, and also a breezeway. So the applicant wanted to connect their existing medical facility located to the north to the future building as a covered walkway between the two structures to shelter patients and employees and so forth and so on. And so this is an image of the site plan. We included it in your packet. Now this does show more than just the property that's zoned PD. It also shows the existing medical facility that Hetty Leg owns and operates to the north. But it shows that connected breezeway between the two buildings. We provided a red line to try to more clearly illustrate the area that is zone PD. And so what you see are those two existing buildings that are kind of L-shaped, catty-corner to each other. You see improved parking surfaces and paved parking, and which does meet current code based on what they're showing for the medical office. And also additional street landscaping to meet our commercial streetscaping requirements. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about specifically was the existing fence. So upon completion of a land survey, the existing fence located between the properties was actually identified to be just south of the property line. So it's actually located completely on the property owner side to the south. And so when the proposal was first brought forward, it was based on the premise that the fence was on the shared property line, so it could be kind of easily maintained without the need to have any agreements about going onto the other person's property to maintain improvement that was off-site. And so upon completion of the survey, the applicant actually went ahead and built the new fence a little prematurely. We wish they would have done it after this was completed, but they went ahead and built the fence as a replacement to the existing one. There are there is one deficiency that we're gonna ask the commission to place as a condition, and we'll show you in a minute. There's actually a small gap between the new fence that they built and the fence along the western property line that needs to be closed. And so that'll be something that we ask the commission to just note as a condition that that's closed. And the applicant actually, when they constructed the fence, they put the finished side facing the commercial business, which is supposed to face the residential side. And so they're actually going to be refinishing that side, so that way it's a smooth, finished fence on both sides, essentially. So it'll still look like it was built to meet current code, but it's gonna be a small retrofit after the fact. We also met with Mr. Brad Mall, he's a property owner to the south, to talk about the existing fence and the removal of that, so that way we didn't have a kind of fence-on-fence situation. Mr. Mall has agreed to permit the Hay Leg property owners to remove that existing fence. So that way we don't have to worry about any kind of future issues with trying to repair a fence with a fence right on top of it. They are still in negotiations as to that private agreement. The city's not party to that private agreement. Essentially, the applicant has met the intent of the PD condition to provide the screening. They'll just need to make some small changes to fill the gap and then refinish the other side, so it is a clean side of the fence that's facing the property owner to the south. And so just wanted to provide kind of that clarification, and then show you some images of the property. So here you see 817 North Mound facing the property from the street. This is a picture located more interior. So the brown building, that's that existing multifamily building that's gonna be retrofitted. The exterior is gonna be upgraded with new trim and paint. And then the storage building is, the white building is gonna be left in its current state. These images show you the new fence that was built in relation to that existing fence. So you see that the side where some of those exposed boards are facing the south, that should actually be reversed, but they're going to retrofit it so that there's also a finished side facing the residential side. And then you see those existing trees that have been preserved as part of that fence extension. Again, this is just another image of that new fence that was built by the applicant. This is an image of a vehicle actually backing out of the PD property. And so one of the requirements for a fence is that it has to be built 12 feet from the back of the street curb in order to not block any kind of visibility as people are backing out from a property onto the street. And so the neighborhood has expressed concerns with kind of the visibility of backing out, but we wanted to show you an image of that's actually an employee's vehicle, and you can see that they've backed out and there's room as you're sitting in that in the driver's side, where there's visibility on both sides and you're still not having to back out into the property. The applicant has stated that they would be willing to retrofit that fence to kind of reduce the height in that area, but that's not a condition that staff is proposing, and so that may be an item of discussion that comes up as part of the public hearing process. This is that gap that we were telling you about. So on the left, you can see the shiny new fence, and then on the right, that's that western fence. And then in the background, you can see Mr. Mall's existing fence that would be removed, and so there will be a small gap that we're going to ask them to close. So essentially connecting the new fence to the western fence, if that makes sense. We did notify 22 property owners within the 200-foot notification area. We did get one written letter in support of the request. And of course, we met with Mr. Mall, who's a property owner directly to the south. But beyond that, we didn't receive any additional public input regarding the request. These are the conditions for approval for the final PD site plan. Staff finds that it does meet all of the conditions set out by the ordinance and the conditions that were approved as part of the original development plan that established the PD. And with that, we'll conclude staff's presentation. The applicant is in attendance. I know that there's some other people in attendance who would like to address the commission, and so with that, I'll take any questions from the commission before we open up the public hearing. And I'll go back to the PD site plan exhibit.
Were there any requirements to do any landscaping on the existing property to the north
No.
in the, okay.
So that property is already zoned medical, and it wasn't included in the PD, so there aren't any required changes for that one.
Elena, I did have a question about this, the site development plan. There was a key, but, in terms of the numbers that are referenced on here,
Yes.
where was that key, or what does that refer to?
So are you talking about the red circles with the numbers? Those are the number of parking spaces.
Oh, got
So
it.
it's just a count.
Got it.
And based on the size of the medical office, they are meeting the minimum parking requirement.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Alton? No? Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the public hearing. If anyone's here to speak for or against this proposal, please feel free to come up. Just introduce yourself with your name.
Hello.
Brad Mall, 735 Mill Street. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you. This is Sticky Wicket. I want to give a little more human face to this if I can. When you approved this plan in September, it said we agreed to repair, replace, and maintain the existing fence. That was your idea, Lily. And that was the agreement. That was the agreement approved by City Council. That was the plan development. And 3 months later, they built a new fence on the property, 10 inches away from the existing fence. I have photographs. You've seen some of them. But it's literally like you can't put your, that you couldn't go between it or anything. So they had agreed the existing fence. They didn't say tear it down. They didn't say build it in a new spot. They didn't say remove. They didn't say anything. And the new fence, they had already built. And nobody talked to me about it. Planning and zoning didn't know about it, I don't think. Elena, I don't think, knew about it. The contractor pulled a permit for it, but they didn't tell the permit office that they were building next to an existing fence, like the original agreement for the plan development. So I know that, all that other stuff is good, but where's the plan development if you break the plan development? The fence being so close to my original fence now made it impossible to maintain the small space between the new fence and the original fence in the agreement. It's now sort of a no man's land that catches leaves and fallen branches, and it cannot be repaired or replaced or maintained by either of us, actually, because of that small distance. So I had nothing to do with this. I did not ask for anything after the agreement was made, but now you want me to tear down my fence, the one that connects and matches the west side of my yard. And Elena did say, the original fence board faced my property. That's known as the pretty side. And now I have the back of their fence. Metal screws stick through the new fence onto my side, a 3/4 of an inch extra. I have photographs if you want to see. There's 53 screws per 10-foot section times 19 sections, making it not a fence, but a 200-foot-long screw-filled hazard to anybody in my backyard, gardeners, me, anybody. And if I agree to they can tear the original fence down, rather than sharing a fence as before, they will have essentially moved the property line, and they want me to sign a legally binding paper giving them an extra foot of property in my yard. Now, I don't know about you, but do you have a document signed with your neighbor to allow them access to your yards? I don't think so. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe such an agreement could potentially tie up my property, at the very least, dirty up the deed of my property. And even if I accept everything that they and the city seem to want me to do, who's to say it will ever be done? I mean, there's no teeth in that agreement. She just said it's got nothing to do with us. That's a personal problem between Brad and Hetty Leg. And here's some silly questions. Can I lean against this fence? Can I mow the grass for that foot of that fence? Or do I ask them to come over and mow their foot of grass in my yard? Now, you may say, Brad, that's ridiculous. Here's the letter. We request that Mr. Mall not plant or hang or in any way obstruct the access to the new fence for repair purposes. So I can't plant flowers. I can't plant shrubs in my own yard. Or do I just leave that foot of property for the weeds? And it's become pretty ridiculous, actually. I mean, if you move the original conditions and apply them to their new fence today with your approval, what makes you think they will live up to their agreement for any of this stuff when they didn't live up to their original agreement? They built this fence out of anger, I guess. I don't know what. I mean, if I'd gotten a plan development approved by you guys and the city council, I wouldn't have touched anything until I got the architect plans and then got it approved. But something else happened. So what changes will be next in the plan development that you and I don't know about? And how will it be enforced when I want to be against that fence? I mean, if you don't enforce the rules now, who am I gonna call? Ghostbusters? And what they've done is change the deal after they made the deal. And you know, I think it's silly. What I truly worry about and what I thought originally was about this creeping thing of getting into the historic district. It's not in the historic district, but it's, 50 feet away. And they keep encroaching. And what I really worry about was drainage and noise and light and doubling the size of traffic and patients' visits. That's not silly. But if you can change this unimportant fence without permission, what might you really do when it comes down to the big stuff? Because that's the way all things go. Brad, don't worry about it. You would say, no, nobody worry about it. But then when it gets to big stuff, you go, well, look, I've got the proof. I changed this, I can change that. And I just don't really understand. It's bigger than me, but I don't understand what plan development means if you're going to, change the rules in the middle of the thing. And I appreciate it. I know you guys serve for free. I know it's not an easy job. I'm tired of all this. I don't like fighting. I've never been fighting before for the city, with the city, against the city. But now they've turned me into some kind of activist. And I think you need to at least examine this question. It's bigger than me. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. I have a question, actually, if you don't mind. Is that new fence, do you agree that's the actual property line?
I don't have a clue. We went out and looked,
Yeah.
and there was one stake pretty much where the trees were. That's usually where people's property line is. Mm-hmm. And then that's been disappeared now, and there's a pink stake over here on theirs and a pink stake on mine. And I don't really want to pay to have my property surveyed again, because I honestly don't know. I don't feel good about tearing my fence down when the city's going to wash their hands of it, because that means that we could argue and fight forever over whether I could plant flowers or who's going to mow it. So the way it stands today, I would just as soon keep my old ragged fence, and which was the grandfathered existing fence, your idea. I'll just keep it, and I can lean against my old ragged fence. And I'll be fine with that.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy about their nails sticking through. And that picture of a car backing out, if you've ever backed out on Mound Street, it's almost impossible, even with a running start. But when you have to back all the way across the sidewalk to get a shot at it, yeah, it's probably not a great idea to run a fence out to the sidewalk that's 6 feet tall, but that's neither here nor there. But anyway, I've solved your problem for you, because I just don't want them to tear it down. I'll just keep my old fence. And they can deal with how they crawl into that little space and fix stuff, unless you guys have a better idea. I mean, I don't know.
I have a better idea if you let me talk.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
But to me, if there are better ideas, it needs to be encoded in this plan so that it's enforced, because it could be 2 years away, or when the city washes its hands of it, they mean it.
The applicant.
I'm David Miller. I'm the one with the fence problem. So the reason the fence got built sooner than it should have been is I went to the permit department and they said I could do it. They didn't hand me a plan saying this is how you have to do it per code or anything like that. Now, I'm playing general contractor. I did this before on the other building 11 years ago, and it worked very well. The city worked with me. I do know how to build, but that's not my trade. But anyway, I walked to the permit department. I gave them the address. They looked it up and said, yes, you can build a fence. They didn't say you got to build it this way. I didn't bother researching it. So I did it on a practical common sense set. 215 Consulting marked the boundary lines. They actually dug up in the front an existing boundary line, and in the back, they marked the existing pole. Those were the existing boundary lines that were already there. They just found them. So instead of taking up Mr. Mall's 10 inches, I built the fence on our side of the property. I did not know about the pretty side had to be to him, so I did not do that. So the pretty side situation is a little bit of a odd thing for the city to ask for, because I can't replace those fences on those boards on our side of the property. I have to walk around to the other side of the fence to replace those boards. So I have to have access down through there. I don't agree with that use of that, because Mr. Mall does lose out, because I have to have access there. If he plants a rose bush right up against that fence where I can't get to those boards to replace them, well, then what do? He calls me up and says, Mr. Miller, we need you to replace a board. Well, Mr. Mall, you're going to have to take your roses down. That ain't proper. That's not good. I don't know of a way to replace the pretty side of his fence without being on his property. Now, that fence looks good on both sides. To me, it's a good fence. Before we started this planning and zoning thing, Mr. Mall came to me and said, I want to build a green fence, which is brush, bushes, whatever. And we said, well, we'll agree with you and we'll split the difference, you know. Well, then the planning came along, and because we live in a world of disagreement about everything, we had to deal with all of the agreements on the planning part. So what I would recommend is for you not to make me have to be on his property. I will put shorter screws in the boards so they will not stick through the fence. And let me take care of that fence on my side of the property like it stands. Now, if that's not possible and I have to go to city code, I will be happy to go on his side of the fence and replace it, you know, put smooth. And because the more I work there, the more money I make. It's about what it amounts to. And I will be happy to cut down where the truck was just a little bit of an angle so that we'll both have a little bit more room to look out. The city requires 12 feet. I went 15 feet back so that when a truck could pull out, you can see. And as you saw that truck, that's not a problem. But, you know, if y'all can't change the city's ordinance on the fence building where it's got to be pretty on his side, let me build it pretty on his side. Let me get the nails out of the way. Or let me fix it where I don't even have to get on his property. I'll get the nails out of the way and leave the fence like it is. He's already agreed to that anyway. But whatever we need to do to make it right, I care about my neighbors.
Thank you.
Lane, I have a question. I haven't had a chance to look this up.
Yeah, and I can,
Is-
Do you want to look it up? I
Is
have it.
there if there are standards for fence maintenance in commercial districts that border residential, is there any sort of codified access for maintenance purposes in that statute?
no, so I'll provide some clarification. So, as Mr. Mall stated, one of the conditions of the fence requirement was to repair, replace, or maintain. And so essentially what Heady Leg has done is replace. They replaced that existing fence with a new one. The commercial district standards say that if you have a commercial development next to single family, then essentially the pretty side has to face the residential
Single family.
area. Now, when you look at the code, it describes the location of that fence being in close proximity to the property line. It doesn't say that it has to be on the property line. It doesn't require an access easement along the property line. Essentially says, locate the fence in close proximity with the finished side replacing. Now, we've never had issues in the past with commercial property owners having to maintain their fence. Typically, they'll remove sections at a time and then replace sections at a time. I can understand it may be difficult to replace a board at a time, but this is a little unique situation because it's a retrofit versus a brand-new commercial construction in the middle of an existing neighborhood. But to speak to your comment, no, there's nothing in the code that actually speaks to accessing another property to maintain a certain side of it. Essentially, there's no reason why you would need to replace sections of a fence. In this regard, they're actually having to retrofit an existing fence too, because it wasn't installed correctly in the first place. And so in that case, yes, it might be difficult to replace a board at a time, but there are ways to repair and replace without having to go onto the other side of the property owner's area. It may not be preferable, but it's never something that we've come across in the past that's been an issue. Now, also to address the kind of fence-on-fence issue, it's not an uncommon situation to have two adjacent property owners both build fences along a shared property line. It happens all the time in residential neighborhoods, especially because they don't want to have to worry about shared maintenance. Each property owner wants their own fence. So it's not uncommon to have literally fences on fences. And as far as the maintenance, that's usually addressed through herbicide or pesticide or something like that. It's a common scenario that isn't something that has been a nuisance to the degree that we've had to actually write a code for it. So does that answer some of your? I answered one of your questions, and I tried to answer another one that I thought you might have.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that in earlier conversations before we received the final survey for the property, there was some question about the location of the fence. And so the applicant did come to the city and they did apply for a fence permit. Now, what we found through this process was that there's some gaps or loopholes in our system where traditionally planning department doesn't review fence permits unless it's normally associated with an overall site development. And so this one kind of got past us. We didn't actually get a review for that fence permit, and so we weren't aware of it until after it was built, and that was unfortunate. So those are things that we're trying to address because it was a standalone fence permit. It wasn't part of an overall site plan and site development like we would normally see. And so it was built per a permit. It was just built with the side facing the wrong way. Now, I will say that after that was built, Mr. Mall brought it to our attention. We met with Heady Leg, let them know the issues that we had with it, and then started having meetings about what we were going to do about the existing, if we were going to remove it. One of Mr. Mall's main concerns is that he didn't want to grant kind of future access in perpetuity for Heady Leg to have to come onto his property to maintain the fence. Well, if the existing fence is on his property, then that would mean that he would have to grant some sort of permanent access to Hetty Leg to maintain, repair that fence. And so in staff's mind, it was kind of a best-case scenario where they're building a new fence on their property, which would kind of reduce the requirement to have to access Mr. Mall's property in the future, and then actually offering to take on the cost of removing the existing fence, which would require a temporary agreement of some sort to remove the fence, but it wouldn't be a like permanent and perpetuity access to the property. It would just be a temporary, just for the removal of the fence. Now, as far as the other details that were included in the letter about, not having any kind of landscaping there or things like that, that's nothing that the city's been party to. We're not party to those type of private agreements. Essentially, we believe that Hetty Leg has met the intent by replacing the fence with a new one, with the exception of finishing the side so that there is a smooth, finished fence facing Mr. Mall's property.
Sure.
Question.
Thank you.
Yes.
You
No,
did?
no, no.
You're good? Okay, sorry. For clarity, is the new fence on the newly discovered property line, or was there a recess off of it out of caution?
So the survey actually identifies the property line in between the two fences. So Hetty Lake built the new fence 1 to 2 feet off that property line to the north. So it doesn't actually sit on the property line, it is offset. So there's no fence located on any property line, they're both offset on each side. Oh, yes.
We
You
put
wanna
a
come
string line can I come
Yeah.
up? David Miller again. We put a string line on the property line and built it on our side of the string line. And again, you're talking the city, and do I give up 2 feet of my property just to be able to work on that? That does not seem reasonable or logical. Even if I'd give up 2 feet of my property, Mr. Mall would have to build a fence all the way around his to keep an animal in or something like that, because he wouldn't be able to build a fence onto my property. So yes, I put mark here, put a string line and put the fence there up to the trees that you see up front, and then we went around the trees like was suggested. And a lot of this is my fault, and I take the blame for it, for not knowing exactly how to build it. And I wish that the planning and zoning and permit department had some sort of system to where whenever the permit department saw something come up that the planning and zoning is working on, there's a red flag. Oh, we can't give you that permit right now.
Absolutely.
We will have to wait on that, and this is why. And again, part of that is because of not working with the city as often as like a lot of these bigger contractors. So that happened. But I built it as logically as I could, other than the screw sticking out on the back side. That shouldn't have happened. That needs to be corrected. So again, if it's just not a good agreement to have and Ms. Lana says that yes, you can go and replace those boards on the other side of the fence where they're screwed in from my neighbor's side of the fence. So I have to walk around and get to them from that side.
Sure.
I don't know no other way to build that fence where the pretty side is facing Mr. Mall so that I can sit there and work on it from my side. I'm not sure how to do that. But anyway, does that answer y'all's questions? You got
Yes.
any more for me?
Well, maybe, yeah, I guess kind of a question, a comment. I agree with you, there should be some sort of flag on a property that's going through a process like this, plan development, special use permit, something. So if you try to pull a permit, then they make you go talk to Ms. Hilton or someone, whoever you should talk to, maybe city engineer, before giving you the permit to make sure it's not gonna create an issue. But you are the person who had,
It is my fault.
you
I
knew
agree.
you knew that you were going through the plan development process. So
Yes,
it wasn't like a surprise to you personally. So, not blaming you for the fact that you were allowed to do it, but it is, you were in a unique position to look out for your own interests there, possibly. Just saying that. Also, I was just looking at the code of the ordinances, and basically what it says is as the commercial property owner, you're responsible to maintain the fence. Doesn't say anything about how you access it. That may be because it's never really been an issue before, or because if the fence is falling down, typically the neighboring property owner is like, yes, please come fix it. But I would assume that if it came down to a point where, and this is for either the city council or a court possibly to decide, but if it came down to the point where the fence wasn't being maintained and you were unable to go maintain it because you couldn't have access to that side, you're probably, it's an open question whether or not you're in violation of the code if you're willing to do it, but you're being prevented from doing it. And there's no, as far as I can tell, there's no way around that through the code. You just have to have the neighboring property owner agree. So, not to say we should punt that question 7 years from now when the fence is needing repair, but we might have to do that if y'all can't agree on something.
Why would landscaping, I mean, my neighbor has landscaping on his side of the fence, and we went and replaced a board. It didn't stop us from replacing the board. Why would landscaping prevent your maintaining the
If
fence?
Mr. Mall decided to get a puppy and put a fence up against that other fence to keep his dog in, there's gonna be a board in the way right in that particular area. If he planted roses right up against the fence, and they're right against the fence, where I can't get to the board, that's the deal, is I can work around a shrub or something like that, but whatever's right up against this fence is what is difficult. I would like to mention that I am totally taking the blame for this. I am not blaming Elena or Juan or even the permit department. I should have written down everything, and I didn't. I do not have a great memory, and it is totally my fault. I do take blame for that. But the building the fence and being able to repair it on my side of the property, I just don't see how to do that without getting on the neighbor's property. And I have a good relation with another neighbor, and he has no trouble with it. I can do that.
I'm sorry.
Any other questions?
I mean, I mean, I understand, Mr. Mall, I wouldn't sign a legal document either, right? I mean, I can understand why that's an issue.
Right.
Well, yeah, and I don't think you need one necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
as long as, well, you need to have permission to put a fence up, I guess. That's whatever access you need to put the fence up to comply with the law, you
Okay.
need that.
So would a
But-
verbal agreement stand? Be
Yeah.
fine?
Well, it's up to well, I guess you're the contractor, so it's up to what you're comfortable with. But typically, yeah, that's what we would, I think in that situation, it would just be a verbal access agreement.
Okay.
Because, if we talk about putting something on paper,
Yeah.
gets a lot more complicated.
does.
So what happens if Mr. Mall decides to build right up against that fence and I can't get to it?
Well,
It would be covered. I mean, you would comply with the code, which is facing his adjacent property anyways. And if he chose to do that, you could also, there are ways to do it. It would just be a little bit more cumbersome in order to maintain or repair it. And so, like this, Brad, you did speak upon this issue. What if years down the road, the city did not comply with all these? We understand the issue, but would you be allowing him to go onto your property to repair the fence, should he need to, without the whole signature of paperwork? Absolutely.
Lily, do you mind if I just say one thing?
Sure.
So, when we're looking at these PD conditions and approvals, we don't typically make those conditioned upon private agreements between property owners. He didn't need to go on his property to install the fence. I can imagine a scenario where he absolutely has to go onto that property to repair the fence.
Sure.
I would shy away from making any conditions of approval based on
Absolutely.
private agreements between the
Absolutely.
property owners.
Yeah.
if anything, if it comes down to tearing out the fence and fixing it the way it was supposed to in the first place. That would be the preferred scenario versus making a recommendation based on a condition between two private property owners. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So
I mean, I think we
I just wanna
acknowledge we
make a
don't have
note.
legal standing in some of
We,
this.
we
Yeah.
are acknowledging that.
Okay,
But we're just trying to help.
Yeah.
okay. Just
But we
wanna
do,
make-
but we
make
do have a
clear.
code that says you have to build a fence that faces a certain
Yes,
way
yes,
Right.
and has to be maintained.
yes.
Without any, with a huge question mark on how, if there's a dispute between boundary line issues or who, can you access this, how do you maintain that? So that is still an issue.
Right, Chairman Depeche did just say, you know, the written letter is not really necessary if he needed to come in and repair that fence. And so,
None of this would be here if he had just followed the rules.
sure, we are
And
we are
he-
absolutely in
he-
agreement.
And he said that. It just seems like, you know, you've moved the goalposts and you're starting from that point, rather than the original goalpost was my fence. If he had have built, you know, a new fence on that property, it would have been on my property and his property, but instead, you know, my experience has been that it's easier to apologize than it is to actually do it correctly. And that's been my experience this whole 6 months. It's always like, dang it, I'm sorry, we did it wrong. And it still ends up with me, you know, giving up. I don't know how it'll ever work. I don't care about his fence. He built it on his property, but I don't want to forever have an invisible line in my head when my grandchild or my significant other wants to sit in a chair and lean, and I'm like, oh, wait, you know, be careful, because you don't want to touch their fence.
Sure,
And that's ruining the kingdom. Man's house is his kingdom, and now it's like you're putting invisible barriers inside my own yard.
But for clarity, the fence he built's on the line.
it's on
It's
his
on the
line,
line,
yeah,
so there's no man's land.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thought I was
it's,
saving him 10 acres. I was giving him 10 inches. I mean, I was
deed
giving him 10
deed
inches.
that property to me. Deed that 2 feet, and I'll take care of it.
Well,
I know that's not gonna happen.
I think
That would be a
You
private
guys are
agreement.
like Solomon.
That
You
is a
gotta
private
split the
agreement.
baby and
Yeah,
see
I was
who
like-
runs
Well,
for it, you know?
I'll be honest, I have the same issue with one of my neighboring property owners, is we found out that the fence was put in about a foot into my property. And,
What'd you do?
nothing, because I get along with him.
Yeah.
But at some point, if he sells his house, if we sell our house, I mean, then we probably will have to have a boundary line agreement.
I have
correct that.
a similar story that I have a friend that lives on Martinville, and they built the fence, and he went to court and made them tear it down.
It is
and that's possible. That's
You know.
possible. Well, that's what Ken was,
Yeah.
you know, Chairman Depeche was referring to. It could be later on down the road, this could be a court case. However, what I will say is now, in the positive aspects, is that you've brought to light to us by speaking forth that there is an issue in the system, and he, you know, while going through this planning and development site, that he did not comply with the permitting issue because of the flag that wasn't raised. So we thank you for saying something, because that is just something, an efficiency problem that we can look at to solve. And then the second thing I will say is that having a double fence might be a good thing for sound barrier for you and your family and your grandkids or whoever it is that comes over to your house. And I'm just saying from my personal opinion, and that is, you know,
Well, that's why I just will leave my old fence up, and we'll put some weed killer in there or something.
and I think, you know, if that comes to a conclusion, then that's great. I mean, I think if you would allow that, that's between you and him and what you guys decide. I don't think, and again, my personal opinion, there is any malintention on it, just because he knew that there needed to be a fence that was in the development plan. I don't know in terms of,
If you went to the planning office, wouldn't you say, well, there is a fence there, but I'm gonna build one within 10 inches of it, don't you think they would have flagged it?
I
Because
have-
when I called to ask about it, the planning person said, oh, wait, we didn't know that. Nobody told us
I
there was a
wouldn't think
fence
so.
already there.
The reason, Brad, I say that is because I find that there's a lot of miscommunication in between different just in general. Like, we work together and we understand what's going on too, but who knows what that person who's taking that application is doing, or the secretary, whomever it is. And I don't,
Conscious omission of information.
I mean, yeah, and so you know, I can't speak to that. I can't speak to anybody's mindset about how that was actually determined or what. He is admitting fault. And he, you know, he's sat there, he said, it is my fault for doing this. We are taking it as it is and what we can come up with the best solution.
See, I have a lot of fence problems, so I actually have that same problem too on the other side. My neighbor came in and built a brand new wooden fence, but there's an old chain link fence back there and built it, you know, like right up to it. And there's nothing that says you cannot do that as long as he's not encroaching on my property line. It's not great. I wish they would have given us an opportunity to cut out the old fence first, but, you know, it's fine.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, our plans were, because a lot of that, the trees and all, we have wisteria and all this stuff. I was just gonna go ahead and plant a green border regardless of what fence was there.
Sure.
You know, I wanted it covered with vines, because that's a sound absorbing thing and it's pretty. And it doesn't matter whether a vine grows over an old fence or a new fence. You know,
Sure. I was gonna suggest that as well.
But if I take down my old fence, I can't grow anything against it. So that kind of defeats that purpose.
Sure.
So I think we'll just leave our fence.
I think you can grow against it. It just
He
becomes.
just said, no, we can't, though.
I mean, it's your property.
Yeah.
There's no offset or
Well,
easement.
against my old fence, I can grow, but not if we tear down my fence and I accept the new fence as my,
You can go up to your property line.
Fence on the property line, so when if it puts.
no, it's not, it's
If
too.
you allow it to stay there, I can repair everything I need to on our side, and you can plant up against it. And I will pay for half of the plants to go down through there, half of it, like we agreed to begin with. So I'm not sure why you're complaining that I gave you back 10 inches of your property, and I can shorten the screws.
Do you mind coming up, Mr. Miller?
Yeah.
I can shorten the screws to keep that from being an issue. We can pay for half of the green fence for him and make this as right as I can make it under the circumstances. And he can plant all the way up to the property line, which is right up next to my fence, because I can repair everything on my side without messing with his plants.
Sure.
So that shouldn't be a problem.
How about we tear down my old fence and put his fence back on the property line where the original fence was?
You
So
would be losing
everybody's
10
cool. He
inches.
can lean against it and I can lean against it.
Well, you know, this is gonna be a personal matter for you guys to really discuss. We can't discuss that here. All we can do is make decisions on what is going to be the proper way to conduct the development on this. And so Elena, your recommendation was,
Yeah, so, staff's recommendation, whenever we met with Mr. Mall, was that in order for him to refinish that entire length of the fence, it would be difficult to do that with the existing fence in place. So the alternative was to refinish the side facing Mr. Mall's that didn't have any kind of blockages or barriers. And then if and when the remaining portion of that existing fence was to be removed, then they could refinish the rest of it. But we weren't going to, try to mandate that Mr. Mall remove his fence, only that if he wanted to, Heady Legs agreed to remove it for him, and that would allow them to refinish the remaining length of it. But if Mr. Mall is adamant about keeping his fence, that's
there should be no
completely
problem
fine
then.
with staff. If and when he does decide to remove it, then Heady Leg would have the opportunity to finish the rest of it, so it's a nice, smooth side. But, and that could be something that's conditioned in the PD.
I think,
I was fixing to ask if that can be,
I don't want to belabor the issue, but I have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt. The new survey showed that the property line was offset a few inches. And you said you strung a string out along the property line
yes,
and built the board or built the fence on the property line.
on our side of that
A few
string.
inches off.
So if you put
10
you
inches out.
finish the other side, the finished side will be on Mr. Mall's side.
Yes.
Okay.
But it won't be on, he'll still own a foot of property on that side.
No, I don't think
No.
that's what he's saying. He said the new
I
survey,
build it a foot off.
saying the new survey actually he had to recess it so many inches off because the fence, the current fence or the existing fence before it was built, the new one, actually was on your property, across your property.
Yeah.
So you can do whatever you want with
You can
the
do
fence.
whatever you want with that
Yeah.
fence, yeah.
Well, and this is just one person's opinion on this commission, but it seems to me that you either have to be in compliance with the requirements in the ordinance, you have to have the side facing the residential finished out.
Right.
So your options are either to try to figure out how to do that with the existing shorter fence, the older fence in place, or if that's not possible, moving the fence back so you can do it further into your property. I don't know of any other option there, and but that was a requirement of our plan development, and it's also a requirement in commercial landscaping. So I don't know how to get around that.
That was gonna be my question, because this is planned development, there's no changing of that. It has to be where the smooth side is on his side.
Yes, yeah.
That's a great idea. He can move that fence back so he can access it all he wants to, because it's his property
So-
there.
And I know, you could reuse, I guess, most of the lumber, but except for
We shouldn't have to lose a foot or two of our property for the city. We're not doing it for Mr. Mall, we're doing it for the city.
well, you're doing it to comply with the code.
Comply with
for
code,
The city's code.
right.
So we shouldn't have to lose 2 or 3, feet of our property to that, because, it's hard to come by.
You know, that curve
So-
in the fence in the front, then you would just have a straight fence all the way across and you'd have all that access over there.
And if we do that, Mr. Mall still has to do something about, if I've got 2 feet over, I can take a lawn chair and go on my side of the property, walk down the side of that fence and sit down in Mr. Mall's backyard. That ain't proper either. Or Mr. Mall can't build all the way up to my fence in order to complete a fence so he can keep an animal in there. And I'm sorry, I'm trying not to make a big deal out of this. I'm ashamed that we've had to step here this long to straighten this out, but,
Yeah, you might have to have some sort of, like East Berlin, West Berlin situation where you don't need a checkpoint between the two fences, but you might have to have a fence on your side and a fence on his side if you can't get along.
I will be happy to remove the old fence. I will be happy to put a smooth side on the other side, and I will figure out how to repair it, without being on his property somehow. I'll build it so that I can take it loose
I
on my
think
side of the
that's,
property, somehow.
Yes, yeah. And they do,
But I still need permission to tear his fence down. And there won't be no nails sticking out on your side, Mr. Moss. No screws sticking out.
I don't think that you need to have permission to tear down his fence at this moment.
That's between he and I again, not
Right,
between y'all. Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
you guys decide that when the moment is right and you don't want that fence any longer.
I guess what we're saying is,
But you do have to comply with what we
Yeah,
have said in the ordinance.
if we approve this that's a good question. The site plan doesn't actually mandate a fence location, so
It shows
it shows the existing fence and that's it, right?
well, no, it shows the property line, it shows the existing fence on the south side, and it shows the proposed fence on the north side, which essentially is where the new fence is.
Okay. So we would have to request either this to be redrawn to approve, or,
No, so the commission can place conditions on the approval of the PD site plan. So if it was, it's in the Planning and Zoning Commission's purview to place physical conditions, improvement conditions if the commission felt that it was necessary to modify the location of the fence to meet the intent of the PD ordinance, they could do that with approval of the site plan. And then we would make that as a note, and it would get approved, and it would be required in perpetuity. So just like the development plan that got approved with the ordinance, it's gonna be legally binding. Unless they were to come through and amend it through the same process.
Okay. All right, well, I think we need to do a little discussion probably as
Yeah.
a commission on it. Thank you, Mr. Mellon. Before we get a motion, any thoughts from anyone? Any other comments, by the way, before we close the public comment? No? Okay.
Is there,
I think just, I'll just leave my little fence up there and let passions subside over 10 years, and then we'll worry about it, or 5 years or 50 years or something. It's just too hot a topic right now, and it's so silly for both of us. We don't want to be enemies or anything like that, but it's just that, these little ooches of encroachment, somebody's got to stand up for.
Question.
Just, I think.
Brad, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just so everybody's on the same page, do you dispute that the new survey gives you more land?
I honestly don't know. There's 2 survey markers right now. There's 3, actually. There's one that was there and they removed. Then there's one on his land where he built the fence on the other side of it. And then there's a pink marker on our side. And we haven't done a survey, so I honestly don't know. I assume in most cases, this would have never come up. There's a whole line of trees and a telephone pole or electric pole. Usually they build it right on the center of the property. Probably this could have been avoided if he had just, talked to you guys or talked to Elena or talked to me and said, how can we, build this? Because, if I built that fence, I would immediately know, if you see pictures of it, you'd know that nobody can ever face it or come on the other side of it. I just think that it's just, everybody's too divided and too divisive right now.
Okay.
Shannon, if I could address your question, a copy of the survey that was completed was included in your packet. That is a real professional survey that was completed by a professional surveyor, a true and correct survey. And that survey identifies the location of the property line and the location of that fence on the south side.
I think one of the things that you have to be aware of, though, because I owned property on Mound Street at one time, the surveys, trying to do a survey on that old property is very difficult. We had a surveyor tell us that if they measured from one survey point and measured from another survey point, they didn't match. And we finally, my neighbor and I, we came to an agreement about where the property line was.
I think that is the only way to.
And I
resolve
wouldn't
this.
be surprised if this isn't a similar situation, that at some point, somebody did a survey and said the property line is here, and the next guy who surveyed said, oh no, I measured and it's here. These are old property lines.
I think what might be the simplest thing, because we could debate all night if the survey is correct or not, or where the property line is, in order to, as far as staff's recommendation, would be essentially to have the fence be located to where it is completely on Hay Lake's property, so there's no requirement for future maintenance. There's no need for future access or anything of that sort. And if it requires the fence to be, pushed back a foot or two in order to make sure or ensure that that's the case, then that is the prerogative of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Essentially, if this was installed after approval of this site plan, then we could have worked out more of those details. I think what we're coming across is the desire to keep the the fence where it is, versus having to retrofit or change it or refinish it or what have you.
Sure.
And so it is in the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission to require that fence to be modified from its current locations in order to meet the intent of the PD. So I just wanted to note that, just to
Okay.
give that as an option.
So the reason for putting the fence where I put it was because that's what the experts told me that it needed to be. They dug down and found markers from a previous survey done years ago, I would imagine, and that's where I did it. Whether he's right or wrong, I can't tell you. The situation with not knowing where the property line was, even when we went into the zoning part of this and wanting to get the zoning change, we didn't know where the property line was. We weren't sure. That fence right now is totally on Hetty Legg and Associates property. And that's the logical place for it, to save Mr. Mall all of his property. And he, like he said, there's about 10 inches of difference between his fence and the actual markers that 215 Consulting put down. But I will do whatever we need to do to straighten this out.
Okay, thank you. I think, well, we'll have discussion.
Does that mean that where that fence is, the new fence is now, that's all my property over there?
That's what he's saying.
Yep.
Up to the trees is still 10 inches from where his fence is. So that's what's confusing to me.
Can you explain the post? There's two flags, one on his side and one on your side, and then the one in the middle, what they represent?
I measured over from the existing property line where the trees start and started where we were going around the trees and put a flag there and started the post. Now, out front at the road, those flags in the ground are not the property line. They're flags that I've moved around to move the trees around, the fence around those trees.
Okay.
So the majority of those trees are on Mr. Mall's side. When you look down through there at the actual mark in the ground, the rebar that's in the ground, and see where they marked it, the majority of those trees are on his side. We were going around them because we didn't want to have a dispute about cutting trees, because none of us want that.
Mm-hmm.
So the image that you see on screen, the photo on the right, that indicates the pipe with the pink flag that Mr. Miller was referring to, indicating the southwest corner of the property line. And then at the other end, there was a stake with a pink flag identifying that iron rod in the ground. Now, the iron rod isn't there anymore, but, the pink flag isn't there anymore. The iron rod is still there, but I just wanted to give you like a visual to illustrate that, and you can see how it's kind of smack dab in the middle between those two fences, the newer and the old.
That left picture, that was the reason for not going all the way to that neighbor's property, because that's the property line right there. I did not want to encroach on their property. That's the reason there's a gap on that left picture. That neighbor built their own fence off of the property line.
It was also, I think, is that the rear of the back of the building? Okay. And that was the condition, that if it actually was to rot, then you would actually basically repair that as it would be necessary. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. I'll let you,
Okay, so, I'll just try to distill down what I think the issue is here. So the issue is, overall, the site plan. Well, any comments on the site plan before we get to the fence?
site plan
was
to me looks good. It's
Yeah.
in compliance with the shrubs and the greenery in the front. Everything looks good to me.
Yeah. Any concerns with the parking or, and I'm sure drainage is something that's being worked out with the city engineer.
Yeah, so engineering department has reviewed the site plan. It's in compliance. All of the drainage is being designed to drain onto the street. Any additional impervious doesn't trigger the need for any additional on-site detention. It meets the requirements.
Okay. Okay, so no issues with the site plan itself. As far as the fence goes, and this is just my opinion, But my understanding is, it's not only required by our plan development, requirements that we placed on the plan, but also by, city code to have, the fence, the finished side of the fence facing the residential section. So it doesn't, I don't care if the fence is built on the property line or 10 feet inside of it, north, to be clear, in the heady leg side of the property, as long as it meets the requirement to have a fence for screening that is finished toward the residential side. So, in my opinion, I would, as far as this plan goes, I don't think we have any issue with it, because it doesn't show which side is the finished side of the fence. Now, if, I think on the back side, enforcement, or final approval from, the city should require that is properly finished out, the fence. And if it's not, and if it's unable to be done practically the way it's built, then that has to be fixed by the property owner.
Right.
That's kind of my thought process.
That's my thought process as well.
And whether that requires, or maybe gives you an opportunity for an agreement between neighbors, that would be great. Or if it requires just building the fence a little bit farther inside, or a different type of fence that you can repair from either side.
Right.
That would be, or you can also put like a masonry wall in. That's something you can do too. Doesn't have to be a fence. See, it's probably more expensive though. So that's my thought process is, I mean, as far as the plan goes, I think it meets, the conditions that were placed on it and that were approved by city council. But the fence and making sure the fence is done properly will need to be,
Something this commission doesn't have standing on.
Right.
Standing on, so.
well,
Well, we can make a conditional approval.
That it's,
but I mean, it's already a part of it's part of the law that it has to
no,
be
I
done
know,
that
but
way.
that's not something that.
Yeah, so, I mean, the city code enforcement, I think,
Yeah.
would be the,
So once the construction is done, prior to issuance of a certificate of occupancy, we wouldn't issue a CO or certificate of occupancy until all the site improvements.
oh, really, you commission a CO on the fence too?
Well, no, but we can hold the CO until
Okay.
all the site improvements are installed, including the correct installation of the fence.
Okay,
So they wouldn't be allowed to open until the fence was installed correctly.
okay.
So that is something that and we do that all the time for landscaping, screening. Oftentimes the landscaping is the last thing to get installed, and so people are like, we want to open, but we work with them through that process. So it's common for us to
Okay.
put conditions on those.
Okay. So, I mean, as far, because I think the conditions we've already put down are sufficient. It's just, at this point, it's implementation of the conditions, or were they met, I guess is a better way to say it, by the property owner. And so far, I would say no on the fence.
Right,
But they have time to fix that, or figure out a workaround.
sure.
And so I think in a perfect world, we would have had them install the fence maybe a foot away, facing the property owner, and then we would have been done.
Right,
And so I think that's the alternative, either move it so they can finish it, or work out an agreement with the property owner so they can finish it without moving it. A or B, we won't issue a certificate of occupancy until it's addressed, either way. One requires an agreement with the property owner, one doesn't. So we can leave that up to the property owners.
sure.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that issue? No? Okay. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the site plan for the Plan Development District for Lot 12A, City Block 40, which is case file PD 2022-01.
Thinking about this condition here. I honestly, okay, I make a motion to approve it with the condition that it gets moved back on the fence line, just because this would solve all future issues.
Make a motion that the smooth side's on the other side of the fence and leave it where it is.
Yeah, that's against ordinance. This
No,
would,
you saying put it on Mr. Mall's side?
smooth side to Mr. Moles?
Let me figure out a way to get the smooth side on Mr. Mall's side without coming on his property.
Okay,
Well,
that's,
the code
oh,
anyway. That's-
yeah,
So, yeah, you can do.
Instead of moving it, I don't wanna lose a foot of land.
You don't have to.
you don't have to.
The way you mentioned it, I would be.
Okay,
If I moved it back, I would be losing a foot of land.
okay,
But I can get the smooth side on there somehow, whether I use brackets or whatever,
okay.
in sections, without being on his property.
Well, you definitely will have to comply with that. And unfortunately, this was just an expensive error, you know, and a time error. And so I do make a motion to approve this, you know, PD site plan. I think it's fine. And then sorry, that's it. I make a motion to approve it.
I'll second the motion. Any other discussion or?
No.
No? All right, all those in favor of approving the site plan, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Okay, thank you very much. Hope that you are able to get that fixed without too much trouble, Mr. Miller.
Chairman, we could choose to postpone this work session to the next meeting if it's the prerogative of the
Yes,
commission?
please.
Okay.
Well, let me ask my wife what she thinks. Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. We could postpone it.
All right.
So.
Planning on going to the Quill meeting.
Oh, wow,
So-
7 o'clock.
All right, so we can, I think we've all taken notice of the prior decisions that were in the agenda. Thank you for filling us in on those. Any discussion and action on future agenda items? No?
No.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and adjourn then.
All
At,
right.
what time is it?
7 o'clock.
6:43.
6:43.
6:40.
Your wife's gonna be so upset.
Yeah.